Wesathiahala ikata Rafnar. With you all health, I am Rafnar, or Raven, whichever you prefer. And this is the Mimyr's Well podcast, episode 2. Today I'm going to talk about the history of drinking horns and how it relates to the misrepresentation of Norse culture and Germanic culture as a whole by white supremacists. I wrote a speech. I titled this speech, "We Aren't What You Think We Are." I'll just get right to it. Drinking horns carry our cultural wisdom. Our cultural wisdom is against racism, oppression, and environmental destruction. Since we are misused by bigots and ignorance of who we are allows this, we being Norse or otherwise Germanic heathens or pagans or people who follow Norse or Germanic culture in general, we need to show you who we are. To open you up to this, we need to show you we aren't who you think we are. To do that, we need to show you our actual history and culture, which are carried and represented by our ale horns. Ale horns are an important tool for telling you who we actually are, because popular conception has taught you to associate them with who you think we are, drunken, violent, alcoholic bigots. This stereotype is false, and to dispel it, we need to show people ale horns aren't just for alcohol, but are in fact connected to cultural wisdom which speaks against drunkenness and bigotry. So we'll talk about the history of the ale horn. The earliest known culture to have used ale horns or drinking horns are the Scythians. The Scythians were an ancient Eastern Iranian equestrian nomadic culture who migrated from Central Asia to the Pontic steppe in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia from the 7th to the 3rd centuries BC. According to Greek ancient writers Xenophon and Diodorus, the Scythians would drink from drinking horns and raita. Raita, or singular raiton, are vessels shaped like horns where the drink was poured in through the top and drank from an opening on the tip. Thracians also did so. Warriors were buried with drinking horns in Scythian culture almost exclusively. Scythian artwork repeatedly shows warriors or kings drinking from horns held by women. The author M.I. Rostovtsev, I apologize, I cannot pronounce that name, interprets this as meaning they received the drinking horn from a deity as a symbol of their power or investiture. It's also interpreted as a human woman ceremonially initiating someone into office, or as a ceremony of blood brotherhood between warriors, or a marriage ceremony. I want to add in here that after I wrote this, I took it upon myself to do some more research into Scythian religion and mythology, and based upon what I have learned so far, I would find it logical to conclude that this female figure that's found depicted in Scythian artwork as holding out the drinking horn for the kings or warriors to drink from might actually be a representation of the Scythian goddess of creation. I can elaborate more on this later in this video, or maybe devote the next episode to this. But basically, according to what I've learned, in Scythian mythology, they believed that the supreme creator and the supreme deity was actually a goddess, I think named Tapati, I'll have to double check, who's very deeply connected to fire. And in Scythian culture, it was believed that kings were granted their kingship or their leadership from this great goddess, and so they were known to have given their homage to Tapati in return for being granted their position as kings. And so I think it's very reasonable to conclude that it is at least likely that this female figure, if it is a deity that's depicted multiple times in Scythian artwork as, giving the kings a drink from a horn, might very well be this supreme creatress, fire goddess Tapati. But that's my speculation. But on with the speech. So, Thraco-Cimmerian culture likely adopted drinking horns from the Scythians and spread them in Europe, Central Europe, in the Iron Age. From them, the early Celtic people adopted them. Julius Caesar, in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, described the Gauls as using drinking horns. The Scythian origins of the drinking horn show that the drinking horn has an ancient spiritual value as a sacred object representing oaths which kings took upon being given power and office by deities, and warriors took in brotherhood ceremonies, and couples took in marriage. This is important because this is preserved in Germanic culture and verifies that in our culture, drinking horns do not mean alcoholism, violence, or bigotry. In other words, what I'm pointing out here is that there's a much older, very clearly established meaning to drinking horns that is completely different from the way that people have come to see them today. The Romans used to make drinking horns from glass, and this was adopted by Germanic people, but during the Dark Ages, horns made from aurochs horns were common. In pagan Germanic times, many women were buried with drinking horn equipment, which testifies to our association between drinking horns and women. This, of course, you see, harkens back to the Scythian artwork, showing the kings or warriors being given sips from horns by female figures. Like I said, possibly the deity Tapati. The Norse people are Germanic. Their culture comes from Germanic culture. This includes drinking horns. Given that most Norse burials of the Viking Age don't have preserved drinking horns, but do contain the metal fittings for them, it is likely they were mostly made from actual horn. While their being unpreserved means we don't have physical evidence of carved and painted drinking horns, Viking Age literature does testify to the practice. In an ancient sacred Norse poem called Sigurdrifumal, stanzas 7 through 9, a Valkyrie goddess Sigurdrifa instructs the warrior Sigurdur to learn the Ölrunur, that's Icelandic Old Norse, which translates roughly as ale runes. Well, maybe not roughly, but more on that another time. And as it implies, to inscribe them and the Naudis rune on his drinking horn. The ale runes are the runes Ansus, Lagus, and Urus, which were used to consecrate an object as sacred. This confirms the status of the drinking horn as a sacred object. Side note. So if you actually do research on the ale runes, you will find that apparently it was a very old practice in Germanic societies going back to, I think, as early as the 2nd or 3rd centuries CE. I might need to double check this, that our ancestors would inscribe the runes Ansus, Lagus, Urus, which spells Alu, on things like headstones and jewelry, coins, brackets, and things like that. And it's very likely, at least according to my research, that this was done as a sort of talismanic magic practice. Then it was to invoke divine protection for that item or to consecrate the item as sacred. So that's what I'm referring to here. Also note the Scythian image of a female entity offering a male warrior a drink from a horn is echoed in this Norse Germanic story. Because, again, it's an example of a female divine being offering a warrior, Sigurdur, a drink from an ale horn and having an ale horn related interaction with him. In this case, of course, it is that she is dispensing knowledge to him about something that he should be doing with his ale horn or drinking horn. It is in this same poem that our stance against bigotry comes in as Norse or otherwise Germanic heathens, because in stanza 36, Sigurdur says something very profound. Conflict and hatred, methinks, and violence will never sleep. Therefore, a man must keep his wits and his weapons always near him if he would be foremost among men. Essentially, he says to be a leader, one must always be prepared to protect people from hatred and violence. That's not very drunken, alcoholic, violent bigot, now is it? No, it's not. It's Norse heathen. We aren't what you think we are. In Norse culture, there is a story about the most important drinking horn in our beliefs, called Gjallarhorn, where Odin uses it not to drink alcohol, but water. This story encodes our belief in the sanctity of the environment. Odin sacrificed an eye to drink from the sacred well of Mimyr. Mimyr was a giant who protected a well whose waters granted wisdom. Mimyr gave Gjallarhorn to Odin so he could drink. In his wisdom, recorded in a poem called Havamal, Odin actually speaks out against drunkenness and tells us to speak out against all evil we see. Quote, "Wherever you see any evil, speak out against it, and give your enemies no peace." Odin, Havamal, stanza 127. The very basis of Germanic Heathendom is to worship Odin and follow Odin's wisdom. Odin's wisdom, as I've shown, is against alcoholism and bigotry. Thus, being against alcoholism and bigotry is actually part of the basis of our culture. Again, we aren't what you think we are. Environmentalism is also part of our basis. The well of Mimyr symbolizes the great ocean which connects all the world. Wisdom comes from Earth's oceans. To pollute the oceans destroys that wisdom. The destruction of wisdom and nature is evil. So as per Halvamol stanza 127, we speak out against it. Odin told us to. Mead is another proof environmentalism is central to us. Mead is a traditional sacred alcohol made by fermenting honey. It's mentioned in many of our myths and is used with our drinking horns in our spiritual practices. Without balance in nature, the flowers die, then the bees die, and there will be no mead. The survival of our spiritual culture depends on the health of the environment. So being anti-alcoholic, anti-bigotry environmentalists doesn't exactly sound like drunken, alcoholic, violent bigot, does it? Of course it doesn't. It's Germanic Heathen. We aren't what you think we are. It's easy for white supremacists to take Norse or otherwise Germanic pre-Christian culture and twist it for white supremacy because people don't have enough knowledge commonly of what it actually really means to follow Norse or otherwise Germanic pre-Christian culture, especially the spirituality. And so when interest in those things suddenly boosts, like right now, for example, with TV series like Vikings and with games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and you get this sudden massive influx of people interested in especially Norse Viking Age culture, that's an opportunity for white supremacists. They will try to get to people before the educated people do. They will say, oh, you're interested in your Norse Viking Age heritage? Well, let me try to tell you what it means to be a Norseman or a Viking or a Norse heathen. And then they begin to rope people in. And these people are clever. They don't ever outright tell people that they are white supremacists or racists of any other kind, right? Norse supremacists or German supremacists or whatever. They don't. They are very manipulative. They will take the history and break it into partial truths and then twist it, misrepresent it, right? For example, there are people coming out of Scandinavia that will take part of the history of the Christianization of Scandinavia, but they'll twist it to say that there was some sort of a cultural religious genocide in Scandinavia. They will do that because if they can convince somebody with just a small amount of evidence, but a large amount of their personal conjecture that there is this problem, and that problem is that their cultural identity was taken from them because the Christ worshippers slaughtered them and forced them to convert to Christ worship. They can convince these people that there is this problem, and when people are convinced to believe in a problem, that opens their minds to suggestions for solutions, and it's a downward spiral from there. It is true, by the way, that Christianity was spread in part by violence in Scandinavia. But unlike most other parts of Europe, most of the time when Christianity spread in Scandinavia, it was actually not through bloodshed. It was partially through bloodshed, but there was a lot of peaceful conversion in Scandinavia. So they used that small little piece of truth very manipulatively to lead people down a path towards some sort of confused, misled Scandinavian Norse supremacist ideology or Norse nationalist ideology. The same was done with Germanic culture, and well, I don't really want to say Germanic because the Norse are Germanic as well, but the same was done with Germanic culture in Germany in the 1940s by Hitler. It's the same type of manipulation. You know, the difference though was that the problem that people like Hitler convinced their people they had was the Jew, right? They scapegoated the Jews, you know, and that was what allowed people like Hitler to manipulate entire masses and almost an entire nation of people into believing that they should expel Jews and other foreigners from their homelands and, you know, stuff like that. Basically just convincing people that the reason why they had all their problems was because they had non-Germanic people living amongst them. And of course, you know, during the Dark Ages, during the time of the plague, the Christians did the same thing. Scapegoated the Jews and the heathens and the pagans. Said that we were the reason why the plague was happening. It was a punishment from God because there were witches and pagans and heathens and Jews amongst them. But the main point that I'm making here is that since we know that in modern times the white supremacists that are trying to appropriate Norse culture and Germanic culture in general, pre-Christian Norse and Germanic culture, are going to use that same tactic today just as they always have, especially when we have this sudden flood of people newly interested in their Germanic pre-Christian culture and their Norse pre-Christian culture. And we know that what makes it a lot easier for them to do that is people being ignorant of what it actually means to be a Norse or otherwise Germanic heathen or pagan. That is, you know, the fact that Norse or Germanic heathens and pagans aren't what people think we are, then therefore part of the medicine that we need to apply in order to try and prevent these white supremacists from doing this manipulative tactic to try and spread their ideology, we need to tell people who we actually are. We need to get more people to start to think about the fact that there's this whole culture, this whole category rather of cultures, the Germanic diaspora, that they have had some idea of, and that their idea is incorrect, and that it's really important that we start getting them to change their idea of that. You know, we need to start making it more mainstream that people know and understand what it actually means to be a Norse or Germanic heathen, because we aren't what most people think we are. We're not white supremacists. We don't support white supremacy. Thank you very much for watching my video. Please stay tuned for the next episode, and have a wonderful day. Oh, and while I'm at it, in case you're interested in buying some drinking horns, I actually make and sell drinking horns. And if you'd be interested in buying a custom one from me, please email me, because I do this for a living. If you want one like this, this is about 12 or 13 inches, and it holds about 10 to 12 ounces. This is my personal one, but if you would like one like this around this size and type, it's $54 plus shipping with custom artwork on it. And if you want a stand to go with it, stands are $21 each. They're also customizable. So if you would like to order a custom drinking horn from me, please email me. My email will be in the description on this video. And if you have any questions of any kind, especially in regards to my research and where I get my information from, please feel free to comment. Thank you very much, and have a happy day. Grow strong and think deep.